Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Jessica Freedman. I'm just going to make sure that all of our platforms are working here. I believe they are. Okay, it's nice to see everybody. Happy Thursday night. We're going to give everyone a little bit of time to arrive, and then I will go ahead and introduce myself for those of you who are new to our group and who are new to me and who are new to our Thursday Night Lives. So let me and I'm going to go on over to our private Facebook group, which all of you are welcome to join. So if you are not yet a member of our private Facebook group, please think about joining it because you can ask me questions. We are creating a supportive community there of parents, some students, who are interested in learning about being pre-med, medical school admissions, residency admissions, and you can ask questions there, and I am happy to answer those. So if you just sort of type into, let me just make sure everyone can hear me. If you can go ahead and just type into the comments where you're watching this from. I always like to know where everyone's watching us from, what stage of the process you're in. That can help me to sort of potentially tailor the questions that I answer depending on what the majority of our audience is interested in. Houston, love Houston. I wonder if you went to the Michigan-Washington game this past week. But I'm a big Texas fan. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to just move on over to our Facebook group. And just first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. I realize not all of you know me. Some of you may be, you did not go to the game. All right. This is great. New Jersey, Florida, terrific. So we're from Virginia. So we're from all over the country. I love it. All right. So my name is Dr. Jessica Freedman. For those of you who don't know me, I am the chair and founder of MedEdits Medical Admissions. I'm an emergency physician. I'm a former medical school admissions officer, residency admissions officer. I was on faculty at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I also worked in education, hospital committees, all the things that we do in academic medicine, which is a lot. Anyway, so I'm going to hop on over to our Facebook group. For those of you who don't sort of know our routine, every Thursday I will ask for questions in the Facebook group just in case someone is not able to attend and they want to ask a question in advance. So I'm going to start answering those. So Ronald asks, are U.S. residency programs adverse to American citizens who graduate from a foreign medical school, such as those located in Latin America and the Caribbean? So U.S. citizens who go to international medical schools, they are considered U.S. citizen international medical graduates. And if you look at the residency match data put out by the National Residency Matching Program, the NRMP, National Residency Matching Program, divides up data based on U.S. citizen international medical graduates and non-U.S. citizen international medical graduates. So you can find some data there, first of all. There certainly are going to be some residency programs that are not really going to be very IMG, meaning international medical graduate friendly. So, if you choose to go to medical school offshore, either at a Caribbean school or a school in another country, you want to pay very close attention to where those students are matching. And when you are looking at residency programs, many residency programs are going to list all of their current residents and where they went to medical school. That's going to give you an idea if that residency program is willing to consider international medical graduates. So yes, it is possible to get a residency here in this country if you go to medical school abroad. Are there some programs and even some specialties that are going to be very, far out of reach, or, not completely out of reach, but unlikely? Yes, there most definitely will be. Okay. Suzanne asks, is residency matching impacted by where you are a resident? No, it is not. So it doesn't matter where you are resident. You can match anywhere in the country. This is not like, trying to get into state medical schools that receive state funding. So if you're out of state, you are not going to have a very good chance at getting into that medical school. The same as does not hold true for residency matching. It's a good question. All right. Vanutha asks, if a pre-med student works as an EMT, do they still need to do clinical shadowing / office hours? So first of all, shadowing is something we don't want students collecting hundreds and hundreds of hours. I still like the idea, even if a student is an EMT, I still like the idea of them doing some shadowing because I think it gives a student exposure to more specialties in medicine, and it gives a student exposure to more settings in medical practice. So if you're working as an EMT, you're certainly going to have a great idea of emergency medicine, of pre-hospital practice, and operations in the field. But to also kind of get an understanding of, let's say, how a primary care physician works or how a surgeon works, kind of getting a sense of those other specialties is going to give you a broader perspective. It's potentially going to give you more to talk about during interviews. It certainly is going to give you more exposure to medical practice. So when you actually do have to choose a specialty, you're going to be more informed. So I do like students to do some shadowing, even if they do have a primary, clinical job or clinical experience that is really taking precedence. Okay. Ruchi asked, does taking pre-college 3-week summer residential program at the University of Chicago in biotechnology with lab or similar at Georgetown, Penn, boost the CV for a rising sophomore for a BA/MD direct admit? Some courses do offer college credit with the transcript. Other courses just offer certificate of completion. So generally speaking, if we're talking about BSMD applicants, either high school students that want to go to BSMD programs or they're looking to get into, very elite, very competitive colleges, we generally are not huge fans of pay-to-play programs. We're not huge fans of those, whether that's for a high school student or whether that's for a medical school applicant. However, there are some pay-to-play programs if you are a STEM-focused high school student that are worth paying for, and they are very prestigious. They are very difficult to get. So we look at these on a case-by-case basis. If you are going to do if you're going to take coursework, however, over the summer at a U Chicago, a Penn, any of those, kinds of colleges, those elite colleges, you ideally want to be taking those courses for credit so that you can send a transcript to the colleges that you're applying to. So we don't want you taking 3-week, kind of let's delve into your interest and you get a certificate. Those really don't carry a lot of weight in the BSMD process or in the college admissions process. Probably 10, 15 years ago they did, but at this point, that's really not going to do much for a student. So I would opt for the 4-credit classes. Okay, let me see. Anamika asks, how many hours of shadowing and clinical hours are needed for med school? Do they have to be spread over 4 years of undergrad? So we don't recommend definitive numbers of hours that you need for any given activity because every applicant is an individual. Medical schools most definitely practice holistic admissions and they look at each applicant as an individual, and no one is expected to excel in every single area. Major areas being, let's say, research, clinical work or clinical exposure, community service. There's so many, right? So we really look at the individual student. Now, ideally, we want the student to have some type of clinical exposure, whether that's through volunteering, whether that's through shadowing, whether that's through clinical work. We want that to be sort of a constant over the 4 years of undergraduate college, maybe even the 5th year of, with more and more students taking at least one gap year before medical school. So we do like there to be some level of consistency in terms of clinical exposure. Now, there are some students who their clinical work is going to be the thing that helps them really excel in the process and stand out. Now, for those students, they may have 1,000, 2,000 hours of some type of clinical work. Perhaps it's all in at one job, or maybe it's across, a few different experiences. So we don't sort of like to make these blanket recommendations, because every student is going to stand out in their own way. Okay, good questions today. Let me see, and then I'll go to the question board and I'll start answering those. Does working and participating in the museum count as a hobby in the application? Absolutely. You aren't expected to spend every single waking moment doing something that's related to science and medicine. Physicians are smart people, they're motivated people, they have a variety of interests. Have something else to talk about. Don't just only write about medicine on your application. It's great to have hobbies. It's great to have interests that are outside of medicine and science, most definitely. Okay. If the student does research as part of credit and spends more than 20 hours weekly in the lab, can that be listed as a research activity, or shouldn't it be counted because the student's getting class credit? Absolutely. If a student is spending 20 hours a week in the lab and they're getting credit for that experience, that should be listed as a research experience in the application, most definitely. Okay. If students do not have EMT, emergency medical technician, CNA, certified nursing assistant, and other required certifications, what options do they have to get clinical experiences or hours? Some of this will depend on where the student lives and what the requirements are for in the state where they live in terms of what is required. There are going to be some practitioners, again, depending on what the rules and regulations are within the state where you live. There are going to be some medical practitioners who might take on a student as a medical assistant without any prior training, even potentially as a scribe. Sometimes the practitioner will train the student themselves, depending on the office. So, and then sometimes, students can, volunteer in a free clinic, volunteer in a clinic or in some capacity where maybe they're taking blood pressures or something of that nature. So there definitely are ways to get clinical exposure, hands-on experience without getting real training. I encourage you, depending on what state the student lives in or what state the student has access to, where they have relatives, where they go to college, to find out what the rules are within that state, and then to, seek out positions where maybe the student can work without having a formal, having formal training or having, a formal degree in something, so to speak. Okay, now I'm going to move to the board. Hold on. I think I've answered all these questions on our Facebook group. Again, if you're just joining us and you are not part of our private Facebook group, please join. I encourage you to do so because I am on the board every day answering questions. Okay. Oh, you are so welcome. So someone just commented on the medical school application toolkit. This is something that we just launched this year. It is for applicants who are applying this spring in 2024. So if you have not downloaded, if you're applying this spring and you have not downloaded our medical school application toolkit, I really encourage you to do so. It's going to sort of get you thinking in the right way to, kind of put forth the best application you possibly can. There are some dates and deadlines, there are some worksheets. And so it's just a way to kind of, keep the student organized, keep them motivated, get them thinking about maybe how to, sort of put their application together and what else perhaps they need to do to continue to bolster their candidacy during the application year. Okay. My daughter did an internship at NASA in high school. She won a research competition. She presented her research at an international conference. Even though this is a high school activity, is it worth mentioning in the MD activity if all the 15 slots are not taken up by college activities? This is a great question. So the only time that we recommend including a high school activity in the primary application for medical school, assuming you have the space. Not everybody does, but if you do have the space and you have an experience in high school, like this student did working for NASA and publishing her research or presenting her research, then absolutely this is something that should be included in the application because it shows national level contribution at a very, very young age. So if there's something really significant from high school that is at that level, then it most definitely should be included in the medical school application, assuming that there's space. Okay. Just looking through the questions. Thank you all for being here today. Okay. As a pre-med student, how can I be 100% certain a course will count towards my science GPA when applying to medical school? I want to take an agriculture, ecology, as well as entomology class, but I am not certain how they will be weighted. So for specific courses, because now there are just so many different courses that there is no way that the AMC can list every single class that's being offered at every single college in the country. So the first thing I recommend you do is look at the AMC, Association of American Medical Colleges course classification. See if there's anything there that sort of might give you an idea of whether or not these courses are going to classify as BCPM, meaning biochem, physics, math. That's your science math GPA. It's a very important GPA when you're applying to medical school, but you're probably more likely to get this information from your college, from the registrar. Ask them how it's classified and in what department it is classified, and that's going to give you the information of whether it's going to be considered a BCPM class or not. And then after you get that information from your undergraduate college, if you still have questions, once you know what department it's being listed under, then you can call the AMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, and you can ask them, my college says, this course is under this discipline. Does that count as BCPM? So it's a sort of potentially going to be a two-step process for you. Muhammad asks about nutrition opportunities for pre-medical students. Certainly, nutrition is, obviously very important in medical practice. It's very important with regards to preventive health. And we certainly have some students who have done, for example, the nutrition master's program at Columbia who have successfully gotten into medical school. I don't know that we've had anyone who's actually worked as a nutritionist, who's gone to medical school. But certainly if a student's going to be working in nutrition, especially as that's aligned with regards to preventive health care, that certainly would be something that would be terrific for the purposes of medical school. How does MedEdits help students with applying to medical school? We help with everything with regards to the application process, whether you are about to start your freshman year of college, whether you are getting ready to apply this coming spring. I encourage you to sign up for a free 15-minute consultation if you want to learn more, or you can join our Facebook group and I can connect you with someone to talk to through the Facebook group. Robert Schwartz asks, how is clinical work versus research? How important is one versus the other? Again, it depends on your goals. It depends on what the student's niche is. For a student who is aiming to go to a top tier medical school, we most definitely recommend the student have research. Those are very research heavy schools. They are looking for scholarly students. They want students to have research experience. If you look at the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements, you can see what percentage of students that matriculate at any given medical school, what percentage of students have certain types of experiences, one of those experiences being research. The more competitive, the more selective the medical school, the higher the percentage of students who have research. We rarely work with students who are aiming to go to MD granting or allopathic medical schools who don't have research. They have different amounts of research, but they all have some research. In terms of which is more important, clinical versus research, this really depends on the individual student. It depends on where their strengths are. It depends on what their niche is. It depends on what their interests are. I can tell you that we work with students who do very well in the process, who have way more clinical experience than they do research. By the same token, we work with students who do very well in the application process, who have a tremendous amount of research and who have really excelled in research and have no hands-on clinical experience. They have clinical exposure and they know a lot about medical practice, but they've never actually worked in clinical medicine. So there's huge, huge variation. This is why we don't sort of ever put a one-size-fits-all on anything, because this is about the student's interest, the student's strengths, and we make those recommendations based on the individual. What are good clinical activities? So when you're talking about clinical activities, you're talking about hands-on clinical experience. Some of the most common ones are working as a certified nursing assistant, working as a medical assistant, working as a phlebotomist, a pharmacy technician, scribing, working as, even something like an EKG tech. So anything where or working as an EMT. There are a lot of undergraduate colleges where they have on-campus EMT squads. And so anything that's going to allow you to actually touch a patient and talk to a patient. And there are a lot of options. My daughter only has 200 hours of clinical working hours, but she has been working for biomedical research for 3 years for 30 hours a week. Wow. Should she apply directly or taking a gap year to accumulate 1,000 to 2,000 hours of clinical experience? Not necessarily. If assuming the student has been working for 3 years for 30 hours a week, we're talking that she has a couple thousand hours of really great research experience. I'm assuming that that's going to come with a really strong letter of recommendation from whomever has been supervising her at her work. Maybe it also is coming along with publications, presentations, things of that nature. So assuming that her academics are really stellar, she has a stellar MCAT, I wouldn't say she absolutely needs more clinical work. Don't assume you have to take a gap year to get those clinical hours. If the student excels in something else and is really accomplished something else as an undergraduate, we work with traditional students. It's sort of the old traditional. I shouldn't even be calling it traditional anymore, but we work with students who apply at the end of the junior year of college and they don't take a gap year and they're getting into medical school. So the students who are able to do that have accomplished a lot as undergraduates, but it certainly can be done. So don't assume that you need thousands of hours of both research and clinical work to be successful in the process. Okay. Well, I'm going to give a very brief overview here because we could talk for hours about this, but what is the full medical school admissions process starting from application onwards? In May, application systems open. Applications can be submitted if you're applying to AACOMAS, Osteopathic School, TMD, SAS, the Texas Medical School System in early May. AMCAS, the MD system, the allopathic system can be submitted the end of May. Medical school applications for AMCAS will start to be transmitted to medical schools the end of June. Students then complete secondary essays. Those will typically come sometime in July. Interview invitations can start to be extended as early as the beginning of August. Interviews extend from anywhere from August all the way until March or even April. And acceptances can come anytime from October all the way until the day before orientation. So that's a very, very general overview of the process. There aren't firm sort of release dates for acceptances the way there is for college. Sometimes that's a little bit of, a surprise to people. So it can be a long year for people. Patience is absolutely key in this process. Do BSMD programs accept international students, specifically who did all their schooling in the US? There are, if you get access to the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements, you can see which medical schools accept international students, and then which of those medical schools also have affiliated BSMD programs. And those are going to be the ones that the student's going to have the greatest chance of getting an acceptance to. I can tell you it is going to be difficult, not impossible, difficult for a student to get into a BSMD program as a non-US citizen. Do they also qualify for scholarships? I'm not sure what the initial, this is regards to BSMD programs. If they're merit scholarships and they're accepted to schools, they should still qualify for those, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe they should, yes. Assuming that those are private colleges with, obviously they're funding those merit scholarships themselves. Is scribing considered clinical hours? Yes, scribing, that is clinical time. I'd say scribing is one of the most popular experiences that students take on during gap years, even during undergraduate years, if perhaps they're able to work as undergraduates, if they have the time to do that. That is probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular, clinical experience for pre-meds. Robert asks, how do we start working with you? What is the best time and what is the process? Students, again, start working with us at varying times. Some students will start working with us before they even begin college to kind of come up with an overall game plan. Some students will start working with us a month before the application is due. It really depends on the student and what they feel they need. But we encourage you to start off by doing an initial 1-hour session with us where we can kind of come up with an overall game plan for the student. And then we can kind of determine with the student how much, they need to work with us before they actually start working on their application. And if you're interested in working with us, you can either call our office or you can sign up for a free 15-minute consultation to learn more about how we work with applicants. Okay. Do you have any toolkits for BSMD applicants? I don't have any actual toolkits for BSMD applicants, but we do have a lot of information on our website, which I encourage you to browse our website. Okay. I'm not going to answer questions about services and things because that really isn't the purpose of these lives. I just like to, get out as much information as possible for people who have questions. So if you have any questions about services, about success rates, how we work with students, please just call our office. Our phone number's on our website, or you can sign up for a free 15-minute consultation. Okay, sorry, I'm just reviewing the questions. Okay. Brigido asks, is it too early to do shadowing in freshman year of college? Brigido, it is not too early. In fact, I think that freshman year is a great time to start shadowing because it's a passive activity and the student is going to be picking up more active activities, more important activities as they move along in their undergraduate career. And I also think that shadowing early on can help to give the student a sense of what they might be interested in. And that then might motivate them, let's say, to get research in that discipline or, something like that. I also think that getting as much clinical exposure to different specialties is really important, not only as a pre-medical student, but also as a medical student as well. Because once medical school starts, students are actually quite busy and they get exposure to limited specialties in medicine. So the more that students learn along the way, the better informed they're going to be, and they're going to make a more educated choice in terms of deciding on a specialty. Lynn asks, which weighs more on a med school application, research or clinical experience? It really depends on the student, and it really depends on what the student's goals are. For example, for osteopathic medical schools, I would say that clinical experience is going to be more important than research experience. For your research heavy schools, for your top tier MD granting schools, probably research is going to weigh more heavily at those schools. But again, depends on what the student's interests are, what the student's expertise is, and what is going to help them to stand out. So we will have students, who get into all different types of medical schools who may have their niche might be clinically related, or their niche might be more research related. So it's really going to depend on the student, their, sort of their strengths, their interests, their story, and also what their goals are. Okay. I'm just sort of scrolling through some questions that are repeats. So if I don't answer your question, I encourage you to go back and watch the recording, because I probably have answered it along the way. Okay. Hold on. Let me see what this is. One second. Okay. So, how do you prepare for a sophomore to get a medical school application allowed for some schools that offer a sophomore to apply to their application? Okay, so there are some medical schools, that allow sophomores to apply to their medical school. So, for example, Tufts, BU, they allow their sophomores to apply to their medical schools and to get early assurance, admission to those medical schools. For those students, when you're applying as a sophomore, your high school record is really going to be extremely important. Your high school involvement, what you've been doing as a high school student, what you did, were you involved in research? Did you know when you entered college that you wanted to go to medical school, that you wanted to be a pre-med? And then there's FlexMed, which is the early assurance program at Mount Sinai, and that's open to everybody. But it's really the same criteria for all of those early assurance programs that students apply to as sophomores in college. Tara asks, when is the earliest you recommend being a scribe? I would say the absolute earliest I recommend being a scribe is sophomore year of college, just because I think freshman year, it's really important to kind of figure out your place in college, learn how to study, kind of figure out what the ropes are in college, kind of figure out that, balance between, studying, going to class, having some fun, sleeping. So I think freshman year is sort of an adjustment year where you find out what the opportunities are that exist. You basically, you kind of get involved in some things. A lot of those things we see historically that the students get involved with freshman year don't really stick throughout college, and that's perfectly okay. So I'd say the earliest I'd recommend that a student get scribing experience would be sophomore year. But honestly, most students probably will start this in their junior year if they do scribing at all as an undergraduate. Okay, when is the last day to take the MCAT if you're applying in 2024? So the latest date that we recommend taking the MCAT if you are applying this spring is going to be June of 2024. Now, if you are taking the MCAT in June of 2024, you will be submitting your application either not knowing what your MCAT score is or only knowing what your previous MCAT score is. This makes some people very uncomfortable. And if it does, and they're not ready to take it earlier, then we recommend potentially postponing an application. But if you're okay submitting an application without knowing what that MCAT score is, then June is going to be the latest date that we recommend. And that is not going to make you a late applicant, assuming that you do everything else the way it needs to be done in a timely fashion in terms of getting your application and secondary essays in. Are there any more interviews coming? There are definitely more interviews coming. So if you have a student who is applying to medical school now, there will still be interviews that are going to be extended. Now, once we get to the beginning of March, I'm probably going to say, look, there might be a couple, but it's unlikely. Have we had students who get interviews in March who are accepted? Absolutely. But they trickle. I mean, we just had several students this week get interviews that they weren't expecting. So there definitely are still interviews to be extended. Yes. Same question. Yeah. It's good. See, it's good to see that other people have the same questions you do. It's never just your question. Everyone's going through the same thing. Oh, you're so welcome. I'm glad that was helpful for you. Okay. Do students need an undergraduate major and minor or double major? Does a single major without any minors, is that sufficient? It does not matter if you are double major, if you have minors. What matters is what your academic interests are, what your scholarly interests are. How are you pursuing those scholarly interests and your academic interests outside of the classroom? The definitive minor, getting enough, classes in any specific discipline to be awarded a minor, this is not going to make or break an application. So a student should select the major that interests them most. That's the only thing that should be factoring into this decision. Don't try to choose a major that you think looks good on an application. Any major looks good on an application. If a student has a deep interest in another discipline, and by pursuing that deep interest, they end up with a minor or a second major, terrific. But the goal should not be to get another major or another minor or a minor, period. Okay. Tara asks, around how many hours of shadowing have you seen in students as an average? Is that a long-term commitment? So we don't see hundreds and hundreds of hours of shadowing anymore. I would say that most of our students probably have anywhere from 30 to 200 hours of shadowing. And this is because most students are doing something in addition to shadowing on the clinical front, whether that's clinical volunteering in some capacity, whether that's working clinically in some capacity. So, shadowing has really, it's something that we still like to see on an application because it shows interest in medicine. It shows that a student wants to learn about different specialties in medicine. So we think that that's really important. It's also important to be able to write about that, in a sort of convincing way and to speak about it in an articulate way. So we do like students to have some shadowing, but you don't have to, shadow, let's say, for 10-hour shifts or something like that. You can go in and shadow a physician for 4 hours at a time. And that can be, some students will just shadow when they come home on breaks. Maybe they have family physician friends, or they shadow their own physicians, or they shadow their parents' physicians. And so there's some students who will only be shadowing when they're home on, their holiday breaks from college. And so different students will kind of gather those hours in certain different ways. Some colleges have shadowing programs with local hospitals, or a student might do a shadowing program over the summer somewhere. So there are different ways. There's no one right way to kind of get those shadowing hours. Sorry, I'm just scanning through the Do you have any tips on writing a great personal statement? We have so many tips on writing a great personal statement. The key to a great personal statement is you really want to write about your path in an authentic way. What were the things that were the most motivating to you on this path? Not every student has, like, this is the thing that motivated me to be a physician. For most students, in fact, for all students, it's really a process. It's organic. So the more organic the process is, this is kind of what inspired my interest in this. And then that led to this. And then that led to this. They want to understand your thought process. They want to understand that you're pursuing this because it's what you're really interested in. And, they also want to understand, what are the things that are important to you in the practice of medicine? What qualities and characteristics do you possess that we all want to see in our physicians? And the AAMC, Association of American Medical Colleges, does list those competencies that they are looking for in medical school applicants. Those competencies are going to be not only be conveyed in your personal statement, they're going to be conveyed in your application entries. They will be conveyed in your letters of recommendation. So there are many different ways that they are gathering that information from you. But the fundamental prompt for the medical school personal statement is, why do you want to be a doctor? So you need to answer that question by discussing the things that are the most motivating to you and that are the most going to be potentially be the most compelling to the person reading your application. Assuming you have a strength, you have a niche, you have something that you really are interested in, that you have evidence for that interest, you definitely want to highlight that in your personal statement. And this is something that we work with our students on, is really trying to figure out, what is that niche? We hear from students, look, everybody has research, everybody has clinical experience, everyone has teaching experience. So how do I stand out in the process? Nobody has your exact combination of all of those things. No one has your exact combination of interests and things that they've pursued. So it's about kind of pulling those things out and, making an intriguing and interesting story. That's really what it's about. Okay. How to find scribing opportunities. There are a lot of different scribing companies. You can either call hospitals directly. Again, emergency departments, almost all of them at this point have scribes. You can call them directly, or you could just look up online, scribing companies, and you can just start making phone calls. Probably the best way. Okay. So many questions tonight. Okay, I'm going to answer a few more. Hold on. How long is an MCAT score good for? Is there a risk of taking it too early if you end up taking a gap year or two? So most medical schools want MCATs that are not older than 2 or 3 years. So ideally, you don't want your MCAT to be more than 2 years old. So for example, let's say you are applying in let's say you want to take the MCAT this spring. You want to take it in May of 2024, but you don't plan on applying to medical school until May of 2027. We would suggest that you wait another year to take your MCAT. So we want that MCAT score to be 2 years old or less. So I think that answers your question. Is it okay to shadow or scribe parents? Most definitely. Totally okay. If there are people in your family who are physicians and you can take advantage of that opportunity, you should. Does doing a master's help get into medical school comparing with a non-master's? So the master's itself is not necessarily going to help a student get into medical school. Students can do all different types of masters. One of the types of masters are special master's programs. Those are specifically designed for students who need academic enhancement, who didn't necessarily do as well in undergrad as they wanted to do. And they are using the special masters to basically demonstrate that they can do well in a rigorous scientifically based curriculum. Then there are going to be other master's programs like a master's in public health, a master's in global health, a master's in nutrition. And those masters students should pursue if that's really their interest, if they have a demonstrated interest in that discipline. And this is something that they want to do, to sort of boost their career for their future career. So don't, sort of do a master's because you think it's going to strengthen your candidacy, a specialty master's. You only want to do that specialty master's if it's something that is a genuine interest of yours. Does taking AP Physics C in high school help me prepare for any classes in college as a pre-med? Yeah, it definitely does. We recommend retaking, even if you can place out of one of the science prerequisites, we recommend all students retake the science prerequisites as a college student, because most medical schools are not going to take that AP credit. So we recommend retaking bio, chemistry, physics, even if you have the opportunity to place out of it with AP credit. And it should be an easy class for you if you've done well in AP Physics C. Okay. All right, I'm going to answer a couple more questions. Let me see. EMT CNA, so emergency medical technician or certified nursing assistants, and behavioral therapy, do they hold the same weight for a med school application? Certainly EMT and CNA are going to hold the same weight. I'm not sure what behavioral therapy is, because that may not be really hands-on clinical work. I'm not sure. I would need to know more about that. But assuming it is hands-on clinical work, it should carry the same weight. Absolutely. When choosing a university with a hospital on campus like Stony Brook, would that be beneficial for the student to attend versus a school that does not have a hospital on campus? Great question. I would say that it is most definitely a benefit for pre-med students when there is a major medical center that is in close proximity to them. It allows for more opportunity with regards to clinical research, with regards to shadowing, with regards to potentially getting a clinical job. I can tell you that students, however, who go to, like, let's say, more remote colleges, the smaller liberal arts colleges like Williams, places like that that are a little more remote, they're usually going to be doing basic science research in one of the labs on campus, and then they're getting their clinical exposure elsewhere, maybe during the summers. But I do think that there's a big benefit to a place like Stony Brook, Rice, all these schools where you're going to have major medical centers, hospitals in very close proximity, and students really take advantage of those hospitals and those opportunities when they go to schools and in those types of areas. Okay. If a student shadows his physician parent, is the lure from parent creditable? No, I would not recommend a letter of recommendation from a parent. And also, shadowing letters are not, they're going to be more character reference. They're not references. They're not really what we consider to be kind of core letters that we would, sort of consider to be really important in the profile. Your academic letters, the letters from your professors, principal investigator letters, those are going to be the most important letters of recommendation. Usually physician shadowing letters, those are, not going to carry as much weight unless the physician is an academic physician at a major medical school and really has that context through which they can sort of talk about the applicant and compare the applicant to other students. Okay, well, this was a very productive Q&A. I thank you so much. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize. And I encourage you all to join our Facebook group. I will see you back here next week, same time. And I hope you all have a great week and a great weekend. And thank you so much for being here. It was nice to see everybody. Take care.